Amita Nathwani is a seasoned practitioner, teacher, and author in the field of Ayurvedic medicine with over 20 years of clinical experience. Her professional journey is marked by a deep commitment to the philosophy of food as medicine, guiding individuals towards understanding and integrating this concept into their daily lives for enhanced health and well-being. Her expertise and passion for food sustainability as a cultural aspect of health has led her to author 2 books on Ayurveda. These works delve into the importance of sustainable food practices, highlighting their impact on both individual health and the broader education on prevention and management of diseases. Through her writing, teaching, and clinical practice, Amita continues to be a pivotal figure in the field of Ayurvedic medicine, advocating for a holistic approach to health that aligns with the principles of individualized approach to medicine. Everybody, if you could please welcome Amita. Amita, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for being here today. What an honor to be able to talk about food. This is a subject matter that spans across so many genres, cultures, place, time, and even our own individuality. And today I'm going to be discussing food in terms of how the relevance of it, not only culturally, but how Ayurvedic medicine specifically that has spread to so many different countries around the world integrates into the way that we eat our food and how it makes us feel. And so for those of you who are not familiar with Ayurveda, before we get started on the actual cooking demonstration, Ayurveda is a full system of health that not only looks at the prevention of disease, but also the maintenance of health and then treating the disorders as well. So for today, our purpose is we're going to talk about how it is that homes, not only in India, where Ayurveda originated from, but all over Southeast Asia, how homes have integrated some of these principles of Ayurveda, not even really knowing that this has been done. This system of health is about 5,000 years old. So you can imagine how it's been integrated over generation and generation. And even sometimes I, growing up, would ask my grandmother, why is it that we do this? And she says, because we've always done it this way. And through understanding Ayurveda and my education around it, I started really realizing the value of food sustainability. And sometimes people only ate what was really available to them in their environment. They also knew factors like, obviously, when it's cold outside, you want rich, warm, heartier foods. And when it's springtime, when we have more of those dark leafy greens, that's literally what's growing, and we can integrate that into our lives. So food sustainability and Ayurveda really go hand in hand. And today I'm going to teach you a little bit about that, and I'll do a little storytelling along the way as we go. The most important thing I want to share is everything I talk about today are based on some principles. But at the end of the day, whatever it is that you do for yourself, do it so that it is within an alignment of who you are and what you believe. We have a beautiful term in Ayurvedic medicine. It's called Oka Samya. And what it means is that it is the food that you are brought up with that is the most nourishing, or the place from which you came from. That food is the most nourishing. Somebody once said to me, I think I was probably from Wisconsin in a past life because I really love cheese. and that is what makes me feel the happiest. And I mean, even though it's a joke, it is true. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what it is that you eat. Doesn't matter. We obviously follow some beautiful principles of understanding what's in our environment and how to put together our food. But in the end, if we treat anything that we eat as medicine, or anything that we take in, and this goes deeper than just food. I'll get a little deep and talk about Ayurveda in terms of how we approach the world as well. Anything that comes at us, it can be a food, it can be a medicine, or it can be a poison. And it really depends on how we choose to process it. And Ayurveda focuses a lot on that processing, and it mostly comes from the gut. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today and discuss in terms of food, its cultural significance, and Ayurveda is going to be dependent upon our digestion and how we're able to eat the food. So before I get started on the actual preparation of the food, I'm going to give you a little snapshot into some of the ingredients that we use in Ayurveda. And now keep in mind, Ayurveda came from India, originated there. So a lot of the spices that we use are from that region or other parts of Southeast Asia. As we move further out west to countries like Canada and United States and even Central and South America, we're going to notice that there are different spices. So in Ayurvedic medicine, we use a combination of spices that help to aid in digestion. And sometimes people will say, well, I don't need aid in digestion. I already have great digestion. So we might want to use more cooling spices. So I wanted to go through some of these and let you know what we're going to be using. So as many of you are familiar, turmeric or curcumin, as we isolate and extract the actual turmeric root, is most commonly used in Ayurvedic cooking. It is very stimulating, but not too heating, and can function as a beautiful anti-inflammatory. In fact, we emphasize cooking with it because it's fat soluble as opposed to necessarily taking capsules or tablets. We work with cumin seeds quite a bit. Again, a little stimulating, but not too heating. We have fenugreek seeds that can be used for other various disorders or even palates when we're trying to break something down. It's a little more bitter in its nature. And then we also have some mustard seeds, some chili powder. And for those who tend to have more gas in their bodies, we add a little bit of what we call ajwain or Indian celery seeds. Just added to a little pinch to everything that you eat, especially in beans and lentils. You know, the saying, I love beans, but beans don't love me. And this comes from the fact that they do elicit a little bit of that quality of air in the body. And finally, salt. Ayurveda is a big fan of using salt as it enhances all the other qualities. So when we are cooking, this is, as you probably have maybe gone to Indian restaurants or gone to individuals' homes where they're serving food from other parts of the world, you'll notice it's not just how does the food taste, it's a full experience. So for those of you who are here in person, you're going to get to smell and experience. You're going to get to hear the popping of the seeds, understand what it feels like, the texture. We'll start to examine how is the food breaking down little by little. And it's these pieces that were inherently known throughout these cultures that are actually part of Ayurvedic practice. So as we start, I am going to start cooking and talk a little bit about some of the Ayurvedic principles that I think we all adhere to today, but we don't really always have the words for them in Ayurveda. And I'm using a little bit of olive oil here. And again, depending upon the area in which you live in, you can use avocado oil, you can use sesame oil. A lot of times people ask me, well, isn't Ayurveda really all about eating ghee? And ghee is a wonderful fat. It's a saturated fat that we oftentimes use, but the only time that it's recommended is that if you're pairing it with the right foods. So taking in dairy along with other foods, that food combination is one of our factors of dietetics that we don't always talk about, or we don't always emphasize. So, sorry, please give me a minute. I'm learning this oven here, or this stove. Okay. All right. So what I'm doing is I'm heating up the oil. And again, it's dependent upon who you are as a person. If you go to the northern parts of India, you'll find that people cook a lot more with ghee and butter and use dairy to make creamier sauces. And as you go down further south into South India, what you'll find is that the oils that we're using are more based in coconut. Because that's what grows there. That's the indigenous food in that area. And so learning about the food and where it grows is really important. The other aspect is what's in season. So today, I haven't told you yet, we're going to make a coconut curry. It's one of my favorite dishes to make because it really embodies a great understanding of how we can utilize spices, enhance their medicinal qualities, and still use all the local ingredients in our environment. So when I went to the grocery store today, I didn't get to the farmer's market, but I only shopped for foods that were actually in season at the moment. So we do have the last end of spinach. As you all know, it's really the springtime when those dark leafy greens are available. And in Ayurveda too, as my grandmother would say, we wouldn't eat dark leafy greens in the middle of summer because at that point, we're looking at other types of things like squashes and greens that are available. Zucchini and squash, this area is perfect for that. We are in Tucson, Arizona. Corn, even peas were on the tail end. I had some beautiful fresh peas over the weekend, and they were at the tail end. And my chef, my friend who cooked them for me, said, "This is it. They're ending now." And this is a really great way to understand how we're eating our food. So this is another factor of dietetics. Where do you live and what's available to you? So onions are still available right now. And so I'm going to start cooking. Actually, I'm so sorry. I stepped forward because I was talking about our vegetables too much. I'm going to start with the spices. So the first thing that we do in Ayurveda is we roast or saute our spices. And I'm going to be using some cumin seeds today to really enhance our dish. And cumin seeds themselves really do need to be cooked in order for them to be digested. Otherwise, again, if we're just making a dish and throwing food in there without really understanding how it's cooking or how it's breaking down, we're not really going to be able to digest it. You know, some people have a hard time with even eating salads. So our method of preparation today is also one of the factors of dietetics according to Ayurveda. So when we prepare food, we also have to understand how are we breaking it down and is everything digesting at the same rate? And this is inherently known throughout many cultures when you watch processes of, even if you're looking at fermenting bread or sprouting mung beans, that process, that preparation process is critical. So when we do this, this is a conduction oven, a conduction stove, I keep forgetting. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure that it really cooks well. And in doing so, you want to be able to hear your food. And for those of you who are here, you can hear a little bit of the sizzling and popping of the cumin seeds. We don't want to overdo it or burn it, but some of the flavors that are trapped inside of the food that we have, and you can see it's steaming up a little bit. So this is kind of what we're going for here. And getting these cumin seeds cooked really nicely is a great way to know that your food is actually going to be infused with the medicinal properties of cumin. So once we've done this, now is a great time to add in some of the other things that we're going to start breaking down. And again, you know how we like saute onions and garlic and ginger? It's not that it's necessarily sauteed so we can get that scent going, but it's actually the order in which we're cooking it. These are critical components to breaking down our food. So a great example would be eating raw food with cooked food. They break down at different rates. And so if you cook them together, what ends up happening is you end up having some food that's under-digested and some food that's over-digested. So having those combinations is a really critical piece and another factor of dietetics according to Ayurveda. Now, as I'm cooking these foods, some people might say, well, but I don't really like onions and I don't really like garlic. I personally don't like garlic. I had somebody cut this up for me. And so don't add what you don't like. Obviously, add what appeals to you, add what you want as your own flavorful component of your meal. But keep in mind, if we are using food medicinally, we do want to offer the body a few extra things so that we can get them in and help with the digestion and breaking down our food. So one of the other factors of dietetics that we talk about is the quality of the food itself. So is it hot? Is it cold? So everything right now is raw and we're about to cook it all. So this is going to be a warm dish that I'm offering. But also keep in mind, we're in the middle of summer, right? So how is it that I'm going to be offering you a nice warm cooked meal? Is that right for this season? And so if I add in a cooling component, and I'm actually going to be using coconut milk as a way to cool the entire thing down, because we do have so many spices in this, you want to make sure that it's a balanced perspective for the body. The next thing we want to look at when it comes to the 8 factors of dietetics and the way in which we eat is also understanding the individual constitution. So for example, if we already feel heavy in the digestion, we want to use lighter oils and maybe not so much coconut. But if we are feeling like we need more robust food, then in addition to adding some of these light vegetables, I would add in some root vegetables to help the body feel grounded. But regardless of what I do, it would be so critical and important that we add in spices to make it really work so that all the food breaks down at the same time. So I love to tell this story. It's one of my favorite of when I first moved to Colorado a few years ago, about 20 years ago. And I called my Ayurvedic teacher in India and I said, this place is so weird. Everybody here eats a lot of meat, right? So I'm making a vegetarian meal today, but what if you're a meat eater? Does Ayurveda really adhere to understanding vegetarianism? Do people eat meat? Well, it depends on what part of India you're from. And true Ayurveda does look at it in terms of what's available. So when I lived in Colorado, I called my Ayurvedic teacher and I told him this and he said, well, of course. He said, you live in the mountains of Colorado. He's like, you shouldn't be foraging for mung beans and rice at this time. So it was like through that awareness that I learned that we do really need to adhere to our environment, but at the same time, I wasn't a meat eater. So how does one contend with that? And this is when we start looking at the quality of food. So in this meal, I have a lot of like pungent things. You guys can probably smell it, right? We've got onions and garlic and ginger. We're really stimulating the digestion. So if we were to add animal protein to this, it would create a more grounded effect. And this is looking at the concepts of Ayurveda of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So Vata is more air-oriented, Pitta is more heat-oriented, and Kapha is more earth and ground oriented. And so when we look at what are the qualities of the food, is it a Vata dish? Is it light? Is it a Pitta dish? Is it spicy? Is it a Kapha dish? Is it heavy? In Ayurveda, we say all of it. Let's make a full balanced meal. And depending upon your constitution and where you fall, you can lighten it in one direction or create heaviness in another. So this is a great meal for someone who's more Kapha by nature. If they tend to be more sedentary, gain weight easily, this is a light meal minus the coconut milk. But if someone is athletic and strong and wants to continue to build muscle mass, at this point, we would add in proteins. And whether or not it's animal protein or it comes from beans and lentils or tofu, it's entirely up to the individual and what they choose to do. One's individual belief system really, truly plays the greatest impact. There's a story of the Buddha. And actually, as I'm telling the story, I'm going to start cooking some of the foods that we have here. So I always like to start first with the things that take the longest to cook. So we have spinach, we have zucchini, and I also have some asparagus. So I'm going to throw the asparagus in first because it's going to just take a little bit longer. We're really at the tail end of asparagus season here in Arizona, but I couldn't help myself because they look so good. The story of the Buddha, the great Buddha, and how one day he was sitting in the forest and he was meditating. And some individuals came along and they said, does he really know what he's talking about? I wonder, is he just human, just like the rest of us? And they presented to him a glass of poison. And he happily drank it, thinking it was just a gift from some of his followers. And after he ingested that, he sat down to meditate. And the individuals came along and they said, I can't believe this. How is it that nothing has happened to you? You're still sitting here beautifully meditating when we gave you an entire cup of poison. And he said, my true belief is that anything that's given to me is given out of love. And therefore, that is the way that I'm going to take it in. And if we think about that, that's the whole purpose. I also in Ayurveda and in cultures, in India or Southeast Asia, is there's always a prayer that we do. I went to my friend's house this weekend, and before we started eating, instead of a prayer, we did a little breathing exercise. And it was so beautiful to incorporate that because it's about being mindful, it's about being present. And that's another one of the factors of dietetics, according to Ayurveda, is to consider your environment. Are you sitting? Are you eating and walking? I mean, how many of us eat at our desk or in front of the TV? Technically, even though we love gathering around a table and laughing and enjoying each other's company. Ayurveda actually says you must sit in a very settled, quiet environment. It's just quietly eating by yourself. But if there's joy and you're bringing the intention of community and love together, then your meal will be what we consider sattvic. So as I'm cooking this, you'll see I'm not only cooking the asparagus, but I'm infusing it with some of the cumin seed and the medicinal properties that are actually getting incorporated in. This is the point at which some people enjoy putting in spices like turmeric and cumin and coriander. And I like to wait just a minute because I don't want my spices to burn. And also we can infuse the powders. So the seeds themselves need to be cooked. And this is the fragrance that you smell when you go into a home where there's food that's being cooked based on some principles that their great-grandmother offered down to them. These are the Ayurvedic principles of making sure that the actual seeds and the medicinal value they have is getting infused in the food, but the spices themselves can be added later. And because we have a base of coconut milk, we're actually going to be cooking the rest of the vegetables together. So this is the point at which I would add. And by the way, everything has been washed. So if you choose to follow this dish along with me, make sure you wash all your vegetables and try as closely as you can to go to your local farmer's market. And Ayurveda discusses so much about the value of also eating the food that's indigenous to your area. It actually carries such more potency when you're eating what's available to you here and now instead of bringing it in from somewhere else. I remember being young and one time asking my grandmother for a very specific dish, and she said, I couldn't find it here locally, so we can't have it. And I remember saying, but we've had it before this time of year, because I remember she would always call, no, we don't have this in the winter. No, we don't have this in the summer. And I told her, I said, but we've had it before. And she said, yes, but the farms in our local area, it's not conducive. We didn't have the rains. So therefore, there's no need to go to another town and get it from there, because we are living in a drought area at the moment. And even going like 50 miles to get it was unacceptable for her. She said, we must adapt. And that's another factor in Ayurveda, is understanding how to adapt to your environment. It is true that it takes 2 or 3 generations for someone to change their gut microbiome. So that if you come from a place like India, like I do, it's important for me to eat some of these spices, even though I've become very accustomed to eating food that isn't always so spiced. You know, I love pasta with butter, and I enjoy eating foods that don't necessarily have these ethnic cuisines or spices related to them. But it's important for somebody like me. So think about, where do you come from in the world? How were you brought up? And what are some of the foods that you were exposed to as a child? Or even what was available to you at local farmers markets. And so Ayurveda discusses this quite a bit. One of the other factors of dietetics that I talk about a lot is quantity. So quantity is also a really big thing. We are overeaters as a society, but it's one of the most important things. So when I was a kid, my grandmother used to put her arm around my upper arm to determine how many rotis, how many pieces of bread I was allowed to have. And depending upon how many spaces were in between her fingers, that's how many she minused. So it was a really interesting concept. I actually don't know if she had a rhyme or reason behind it, but the point is that quantity is important, and the time of day in which you eat. So once upon a time, we used to have our biggest meal of the day at lunch. That's just the way it was. And then you'd go home and you'd siesta. Even in India, we would take breaks and then go back to work around 4 or 5 o'clock, and the shops would open back up again, and you could go shopping and do your thing. And technically, when you went to bed at night, you didn't really have much of a full stomach. It was recommended that you eat your main meal. When the fire in the sky is highest, the fire in the belly is highest. And that was the philosophy that we lived by. And that was the way in which we ate. And so my dinner was always the same. It's a traditional Ayurvedic dish that many Indians and people from actually all over the world eat, and it's called khichdi, Kicharee, khichdi. It's spelled many different ways. Spinach is last. And eating khichdi is a combination of split yellow mung beans and rice in every way, shape, or form. In other parts of the world, it's called dal bhat. We even have beans and rice here in the US, in Mexico, Central America. A bean-rice combination really helps to bring about amino acids through your dish so that you can get full protein without necessarily eating the heavy foods that we eat before we go to bed at night. Now, some people turn to me and say, oh, I need to eat before I go to bed at night. If I don't, I can't sleep. So those individuals, this is where we start to look at the last factor of dietetics according to Ayurveda, and that is, who is the person? Are you an athlete? Are you 6'5"? I'm a 5-foot person. 6'5", you're obviously going to need more food because when you sleep at night, your body processes need a little sustenance to keep you going. Also, the way in which you eat your food. Today, we talk about it in terms of macronutrients, but Ayurveda discusses it too. We talk about fats, carbohydrates, proteins, and the way that you put it all together is going to be completely based on who you are. I also have a lot of people who ask me, like, how should I be eating? And the number one question is, what is your objective? In Ayurveda and in homes around India, one of my favorite things is that I'll give you a great example. When I call my mom in the mornings, she asks me, you're awake? Yes. Have you had your tea? Yes. Have you had your bowel movement? And this is a way that we understand what part of your day and process have you gone through. And this is also a great way of understanding the health of an individual. What is it exactly that they're going for? Are you going for healthy bowel movements? Are you wanting to experience more energy throughout the day? And so by asking these questions, it's a very common thing that if someone goes to the restroom, there will be a number of people waiting outside going, how was it? Was it okay? And it is because it's the storyteller of the body. What we eat, how we process it, and what comes out says so much about an individual. So every time I get annoyed when my mom has asked me if I've had my bowel movement yet, it's because she cares. It's because she wants to know, have I been through the process? And if not, then the whole family gets involved and everybody cares. And everybody's talking about it. So this is the point at which I enjoy putting in some spices just to cook them with the vegetables right before I add a little coconut oil. So I'm going to start with my turmeric, and this is about a teaspoon. So I'll probably add 1.5 teaspoons. I do like to add a little tiny bit of red chili powder. It just enhances the heat a little bit. I also have here a combination of cumin and coriander powder. And this combination of spices can be very stimulating but cooling to the digestion. So you guys can smell this from over there. All right. And I'll just mix it up a little bit so we get some of the flavors in the vegetables as they're cooking. And this is the basics of most food that comes from India. We do some baking and we'll, create dishes through fermentation or sprouting. Through fermentation and sprouting, but at the same time, okay, we're back. But at the same time, it is really through our combinations that we use here. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and the sauteing process of roasting the seeds prior to cooking the rest of the food is really the base of how we cook. And so once we've put all this in. And again, you can use whatever vegetables you want. And I love keeping everybody likes to cook differently. I like keeping some of my vegetables chopped up a little bit, some of them a little bit bigger. It just gives a little bit more texture. And a little tomato, even though technically it's not tomato season just yet, maybe starting here in Tucson, Arizona. But I like a little of this acidic flavor along with a little lemon that helps to bring in the sour quality. So in Ayurveda, we have 6 tastes: sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, and astringent. And sweet is basically all the macronutrients. It's fats, carbohydrates, proteins, oils, dairy, and sour are all of these fruits and vegetables that are sour in their taste. Salt, which we're about to add last. And in a lot of Ayurvedic cooking, we add the salt last because if we cook with salt, sometimes the food absorbs the salt and then we get too much of it. Salt is actually more of a flavor we talk about, even though it has benefit in the body as a aid for absorption of water and electrolytes. When we're cooking with it, we oftentimes just recommend adding it later. It enhances the flavor of the spices. So I really like to add tomato to this for the sour. Pungent are all the spices. Bitter are all the greens. And finally, astringent. And astringent is more of a quality than anything else. So when we eat this dish, we'll oftentimes pair it with a little bit of yogurt or even some lentils on the side that are astringent. And for our purposes today, we're also going to use a lemon, which is sour and astringent at the same time. And once we get all of these things together, as you can tell, the one thing that's not quite in here yet is our sweet flavor. We don't have any rice. We don't have any protein. This is where you get to be creative and add whatever it is that you want. You can do it during the cooking process or you can do it afterwards on the side. This is a beautiful dish to pour over rice. And then the last piece is a little bit of salt. I'm doing 2.5 teaspoons. For those of you who are following along, you can add more or less depending upon your taste. And this is what we've created is a classic Ayurvedic dish for the summertime. If you live in a warm climate where coconuts are available and the growing season is past some of those dark leafy greens. So I am very happy to have showed you how to make this dish. I would love to open up to the audience to see if you have any questions specific to Ayurveda or how we cook or the food and the way that we use it. So I wonder if anybody has any questions.
Which constitution would you say this dish really be the best for?
So the question is, what constitution would this dish really be the best for? So because we don't have anything else added to it at this moment, because I made it a little bit spicy, we have some coconut milk in there. We also have all the greens. At this moment, it's really good for all constitutions. But if I were to put it in a category to say it's good for one over the other, I would say for pittas, because it's cooling, but it also is stimulating with the spices. Now, keep in mind that pittas do need to have a little bit more than just this dish on its own. So they will need to add something to it, like some animal protein or some lentils, something that gives a little bit more sustenance or what we would call the macronutrients to go with it. The coconut milk itself is a saturated fat, so it can also be grounding. So it's very good for vatas. I would say lastly, good for kaphas because it is that heavy saturated fat, even though it's a medium chain triglyceride, it still creates heaviness in the digestion. But if there's a kapha here who is robust and hungry and just came from a great workout in the middle of the summer, this is a beautiful dish for them. And keep in mind, as we eat or as we go through the day, our constitution may not change, but our ability to break down food will. So for all constitutions, we really need to take into consideration that when the seasons change, we have to change our perspective on them as well. Eating the same thing can work as long as we're adjusting a few things here and there, even with the spices. So thank you for asking.
I have a question. Can you tilt the pan? So I'm wondering the color. Is it as green as it looks on the screen?
It's a sharpness.
And you come up here and get out. I will give all of you a little taste of this so you can taste the flavor.
The green.
Yes.
When like Italian cooking and some good Mexican stews and things, the longer you keep the spices in the dish simmering, the more robust and flavorful it becomes. Same for this or no?
Yes. So we do talk about, making sure that something is staying within it. We also want to make sure that the amount of time that you cook something will break it down. And that is the same thing with botanicals as well. The longer you cook it, the more they infuse, but they can also lose a little bit of their medicinal quality, which isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes we want to be able to do that because we don't want a dish to be, overly hot or too stimulating. I also really want to emphasize, I love talking about the anthropology of food and looking at other cultures and the way that they cook with their food. One of the things we talk about with tomatoes in particular is people say, oh, it's a nightshade and you shouldn't add it. And but when you think about real traditional cooking with tomatoes, and I could have done it here today, is the tomato itself traditionally was not used. The whole tomato was not used in cooking. You look at really indigenous understanding of how it is that we use nightshades. We remove the seeds and we blanch the actual fruit itself. So the tomato and a true tomato sauce is not made with seeds or skin. And so it just makes it less inflammatory. And some of the spices, like we use a spice called dulce, which is holy basil. It's not unlike basil that you cook with in Italian food. It's not the same, but they have different taste profile, flavor profiles to them. And so how we use it and how we infuse it really does change the nature of the food. Yeah. And again, based on what's available in Mediterranean climates, there's a greater need to break that food down and infuse some of those. Whereas with some of these spices, they're already so robust in and of themselves that to break them down more would actually cause them to burn a little bit. So it depends on the spice. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for coming out today. I really appreciate being able to talk about the way in which we eat and really how it makes us feel. Just for a little bit more of an understanding or maybe thought experience is, really food can elicit so much. A lot of times I'll see patients and I'll say, maybe not so much on, the peanuts because they might be too oily or inflammatory. And the emotional response that we get from being told a food can be good or bad. And this all really comes down to the fact that, food and breath. Ayurveda, we emphasize these two components. Ayurveda talks a lot about aspects that you may know about in life that we practice them today, like breathing exercises and yoga asana and the way we use spices. And these really are inherent parts of who we are. In Ayurveda, we have something called dinacharya, which is daily routines. And in those daily routines, we emphasize what is it that you do when you first wake up in the morning all the way to the end of the day. So we talk about when we wake up in the morning, we want to help to alkalize the gut. So we'll oftentimes recommend drinking. I'm sure you've heard people say, "Oh, I'll have lemon water with first thing in the morning," and that's because the lemon itself, although it can have an acidic quality on the tongue, it actually changes its properties in the epigastric region. So it helps to neutralize the acidity that's been built up overnight. And so it's this beginning process of the day and how we set up our digestion that really leads us into how we're going to live our life forward. And breath, movement, and food are the three critical things that we as human beings really we have control over. We can get in touch with that with ourselves. And when we're able to understand how something makes us feel, we can really get to know ourselves on a deeper level than we have ever known ourselves before. I talk about routine, not in a negative way of, getting stuck in a rut, but talking about routine in terms of, okay, I wake up every morning and I'll drink my lemon water, or I will have, the same thing for breakfast and I eat at this time and then I do this. And I talk a lot about when I was a kid, I didn't know how to incorporate those things into my life. And although Ayurveda says, do this, do that. And, I didn't want to comply. I was always a little bit of a rebel. But what I didn't understand is that putting these routines in, or starting to say, I'm going to cook like this and I'm going to see how it makes me feel over the next few days. Or maybe I'll drink lemon water and do a test to see how my digestion is. I'll breathe for 3 days before I eat my dinner or my lunch. When we start doing that, it actually is for a greater purpose than even our bodies. And I would be remiss not to talk about the psycho-spiritual aspect of the food that we eat and how it makes us feel. Because once we can get in touch with that component of who we are, then we can start healing old traumas. We can start to become more acquainted to ourselves, mind, body, and spirit. And we can really bring all these things together so that we become our own best friend, so to speak. We get to know, oh, my bowel movement was like this. Now I know what not to eat. I love beans, but beans don't love me. We get to say these things in such a beautiful way to honor the body. We've been given this beautiful shell, and we get to do these magnificent things with it. We get to eat, we get to move, we get to breathe, and we get to be around others and share these beautiful experiences of eating and really just coming together like we are today. So it's been a real honor. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And feel free if you have any more questions after the class, I'll be here.
Amita, I do have one more question. Do you have any advice for those that are watching in the live audience and those that are watching on Zoom, for those who may be seeking to work with an Ayurvedic practitioner? Where might we start? Any tips there?
Yeah, so there are there's a few organizations here in the U.S. If you're based here in the United States. And even in Canada, there are some organizations that we have a database of providers. NAMA, the National Ayurveda Medical Association, creates a database of Ayurvedic providers who are certified that you can reach out to and find. I always say, though, it's, because it's a little bit still of an offshoot, I say choose your Ayurvedic provider the same way you would choose your primary care provider. Interview them, see if you like them, see if you are meeting them where you want to be met. The whole goal of seeing someone who practices Ayurveda is that they're going to give you the opportunity to be your own healer. And that is what you really want to find for yourself. Someone who will empower you to understand what it is that you're doing and help you get there.
Thank you, Amita. Amita, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.